Game jams. If you don't know what they are events where you have to make a game in a given time frame, often with a theme and other constraints to challenge people. They're supposed to be really good at helping people gain experience at making games, learn new skills, all that fun stuff. This is something I've been meaning to do for a while, but never got around to doing them because I just didn't like any of the themes or came up with some other bad excuse. The closest I've done for a game jam was a music jam, which I definitely won. So I finally decided, you know what? No more putting this off. Let's get this done for real this time. The jam I participated in was the 2 week session jam, where we had 2 weeks to make a game. Something I liked about this jam was that there was no set theme, which gave me a bit more freedom to do what I wanted. But they also gave me some more themes just to give some inspiration, and I kind of liked some of them, which is why I chose this for my first jam. Anyways, without further ado, let me take you on a journey on my first ever game jam. Day 1. So the game jam would start on a Thursday, and it just happened to be the day I would go on a school field trip and wouldn't come back until Saturday. I'd still have some time, but I wouldn't be able to work on it as much as I'd like. So during that time, I could come up with some ideas during my free time so that when I came back, I could get to work right away. The nice thing about this game jam is that, like I said, they gave us some things that we could use for inspiration, and I wanted to use one of them to better constrain myself given how open the jam was. The themes were Last Chance, Unstable, and One Mechanic. Last Chance and Unstable were pretty cool ideas, and I had some ideas that were also ship related, trying to match the name of the jam, but the issue is I couldn't come up with anything that was fun and could be reasonably done in 2 weeks. So I ended up doing the One Mechanic theme, and it came up with a pretty cool idea. Normally in a platforming game, you'd use arrow keys or A and D to move, and some method for jumping. There might have been some other special mechanics like double jumping, dashing, crouching, or wall hopping, but the basics are pretty much the same all across the board. So I thought, as part of the One Mechanic, to make all movement centered around one type of mechanic, a grappling hook. Here's the plan. The player is immobile for the most part. The only way they can move is by using a grappling hook. The player aims a grappling hook at a wall and can launch it. Once the hook is attached, the player can move around freely while the hook remains attached to the wall. I want to incorporate some other ideas, some of which I would definitely add to the game, and others I would only add if I had time. I included spikes, saw blades, and walls that the player could safely touch, but the hook would not attach to, and some other cool ideas I want to add later. Day 2. I didn't really have as much time as I'd like today, but I still did some things during this time. I mostly worked on touching up some of the details for my plan, and I came up with a sort of theme that I wanted, as well as a story. Sadly, I didn't have enough time to include my story into the game, so I ended up scrapping it. I also made a few tweaks to my plan, and I created the project. I didn't have enough time to actually do anything about it, but at least I had something that I could work on later. Day 3. Today my field trip ended, and I had a bit of late work I needed to catch up on. Once I had that taken care of, I actually started to work on my project. I didn't have too much time to actually work on it, so all I had was a cube, a would-be direction indicator to show the direction the grappling hook would be launched, inside of a small prison. Day 4. Today was the first real day where I would actually do something with the game. I started by making an arrow indicator, where the arrow would point at wherever the mouse was aimed at. This took me way too long to figure out by myself, and ended up resorting to a bunch of YouTube tutorials. Nevertheless, I was finally able to get it done, and now there's an indicator that follows wherever the mouse goes. Now that the tracker is properly set up, I can finally work on making the actual grappling hook. I spent most of the time trying to get the grappling hook to attach itself to walls and retract when the player presses the mouse. I got it mostly working, but I haven't actually gotten to the meat of the game, actually flinging the player around. All that happens now is that the player launches the hook, it gets attached to a wall, and it comes back to the player, but it doesn't actually move the player around. I plan on getting this fixed tomorrow. Day 5. I was too busy to actually do anything today, so nothing happened this day. Same goes for day 6. Thankfully, on day 7, I actually had time to work on my game. The good news is I finally have a sprint system, but the bad news is that everything just breaks, as you can see here. Definitely a later me problem, but at least for now I have actual movement, however broken it may be. I also made a couple of adjustments to make the game actually work better, like making the hook move separately from the player, although I still had a couple of things I needed to work out. Day 8. So at this point, half the development period has already passed, and I have basically nothing done. All I have is a mechanic that barely functions properly, and I don't even have any actual assets aside from a basic sprite for the chain. Today was the first day in a while that I could actually work properly again. I spent a lot of time trying to get the grappling hook mechanic to work properly, and in the end, while I wasn't able to get something completely perfect, I was at least able to get something that I was happy with and something that mostly works. One of the main reasons why it took me so long to get the grappling hook to feel just right was that I ended up doing it incorrectly at first. Unity has this thing called spring joints, which connects two different objects together. The spring pulls these two objects to keep them at a constant distance, pushing them away if they get too close and pulling them together when they get too far. What ended up happening was that I had two springs, one connecting the player to the hook, and the other connecting the other end of the hook to the anchor. This ended up causing a bunch of stuff to just not work correctly. The player didn't move correctly, the hook and anchor weren't properly lining up. Then I came up with an idea. What if instead of having two springs, I only had one spring, one between the player and the anchor, and the hook would connect the two objects, or at least appear to do so. There were some weird quirks if you went too quickly, but it ended up working a whole lot better than it originally did. Now that the hard part was done, I could actually work on making the actual gameplay besides the main mechanic, and get assets to make the game more appealing. Which would be tomorrow me's problem. Day 9. Today was by far my most productive day. I ended up doing a lot of things to make the game more, well, game-like. I added sound effects to some places to make the game more lively, and I also changed up the color scheme a bit. I think it looks pretty basic, but it still looks alright. I made an intro screen to introduce the player a bit, as well as a level selection screen with just one level. I added an exit, a way to track how many levels a player has beaten, a way of tracking the number of times a player has used a grappling hook, and limiting them to a certain amount. Day 10. I didn't do too much today, but I managed to set placeholders for the other 10 levels I was going to add, a second level, a restart mechanic, and a way for the player to return to the home screen. My plan right now is to make some map hazards that kill the player, as well as adding some music, which is something I would do the following day. Day 11. I added 4 more levels, with the last 4 levels being hidden until I can actually finish them. Today I mainly made a chainsaw that moves back and forth, as well as stationary spikes, both of which will kill the player if they touch them. I also threw in some background music for the aesthetic. I didn't feel like making a whole new song for this just yet, so I just repurposed an existing track I made. I uploaded the project to itch.io and submitted it to the jam, just so I at least had something when the jam actually ended, although I hope to actually make improvements to the game, as I still had some time to finish it. Day 12. At this point, I wanted to focus on polishing and expanding the game a bit more. I added 2 more levels without any new mechanics, and I also made this neat little sprite for the player. I also made a slight change to one of the levels to make it a bit more easy, and it was around this point where I decided that the story I originally came up with wouldn't make it, at least not for the Game Jam edition. Day 13. Today I added a laser beam. Really cool. This wasn't something I originally planned to have at all, but I thought it would be a bit more interesting to have a new obstacle, especially to make up for the fact that I wasn't going to have some of the stuff I originally planned. I made the lasers work in a cycle, where they would fire every so often, but I also made it a bit random to keep it a bit less predictable, as well as it firing twice to keep the players more cautious, which was totally an accident. I also made a custom song for the background music instead of using the pre-made song, and I also added 2 more levels to the game. Day 14. Today was my last full day to do anything, and I didn't really feel like doing a whole lot, so I decided to keep today pretty light. All I did was nerf the 6th level, mostly because it was a bit too hard. The other games. And at that point the game jam was done, or at least the development part of it. Once the submissions were done, the ranking part came, and I decided to check out the other games. There were 14 of them, not including my own submission. Some of the games that people submitted were really cool, and my personal favorite has to be this game called Downfall. It was really cool, had a unique and fun gameplay, as well as an interesting story. I ended up rating every game in like an hour, mainly because I didn't want to spend too much time playing every game, and I wanted to get the ratings over with quickly. Something I noticed is that every game, regardless of whether I enjoyed them or not, were objectively more visually appealing. They had actually high quality images, whereas I basically just used solid colors. It wasn't just the game itself that wasn't very polished. A lot of the other games had interesting thumbnails that I would actually click on compared to the really basic thumbnail I use that I made in like a few minutes. Seeing all the other games was really cool, and it really shows just how capable some people are, and it just shows what they can make in just 2 weeks. Now all I can really do is wait for the results and hope I didn't get absolutely destroyed. Final results. After a few days of waiting, I finally got my results back. Out of the 15 games, I got 5th in creativity, 8th in gameplay, 12th in scope control, and 13th in polish. I'm really proud of my creativity score, and I'm also satisfied with my gameplay score. However, my scope control and polish were really poor, and in the future, I want to definitely fix that. Final thoughts. Overall, I thought the game jam was a nice experience and helped me learn some things I was doing okay in and what I should improve on. In the future, I want to make better games and also work with other people just to make the experience more enjoyable. Anyways, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.